Our next presentation is using PSEO to explore Midwestern student migration and workforce outcomes. Dr. Gina Johnson is here. Before we start, I'll provide a tiny little prelude to say, in 2018, when Governor Mike DeWine here in Ohio was campaigning for governor, he pledged that Ohio would begin funding institutions of higher education, public institutions, on the basis of employment outcomes, return on investment, upward mobility, and the American dream. And I was part of that campaign team working on that at the time. And when we came into office in 2019, we had a discussion about this, and Todd Jones would remember this, and a few other people from Ohio. And the question was, does the data exist? And PSEO did not exist at the time, so there were opportunities like the Coleridge Initiative and other things that existed at the time. PSEO had been talked about, and I think Gina will talk about this in a second, in 2017, the foundations of this, but it really rolled out in 2020. So April 17th, 2020, published experimental data. This is based on wage match, UI wage match data across multiple states, 1, 5, and 10 years out. Fast forward to 2025, Ohio, we finally come to the position of funding on the basis of this. It's $100 million, it's 4.6% of our total SSI, which is $2.156 billion, which is 70% of my agency's budget. And now we're at the point that PSEO is talking about PSEO 2.0. And now we've got Lumina setting goals for the future through 2040 that are based on wage outcomes. And we've got the One Big Beautiful Bill that's attaching to wage outcomes. And so this is very much where the puck is moving. I'm so excited to have this speaker with us today. So Gina Johnson is co-founder of Data Empowered and director of the PSEO Coalition, working with her board to shape the direction of this effort. Before founding Data Empowered Consulting, she served as senior associate at NCHEMS and is still a senior consultant there as well, and assistant director of partnerships and membership for the Association for Institutional Research. Held various roles in institutional research, teaching, and policy analysis in post-secondary education. Served as a K-12 special education teacher early in her career. Earned a PhD in educational psychology with a focus on quantitative methods in education from the University of Minnesota, and holds a master's from the University of Minnesota, all Minnesota here. And bachelor's from Winona State University. She's currently in Colorado, is my understanding. I want to welcome Gina virtually with us. Thank you for being here.
Great, thank you so much. Would have loved to have been there with you, but the FAA had some, you all are going to deal with this later on today. So thank you so much, so very, very much for this invitation. Was born and raised in Minnesota, lived there most of my life, and I've been in Colorado for about 12 years now. But very, very pleased to be with you. One of the things that I should highlight for this group, don't necessarily have it called out in my introduction usually, but I worked at MHEC, and actually in the late 2000s, shared a cubicle as a grad assistant with Tom Harnish, who I believe was a speaker earlier in your agenda. So it all comes back to MEC, I guess, is what we'd all like to say. So thank you so much. I'm really pleased today to be sharing with you information about the PSEO. I want to thank Zach for teeing this up so beautifully. To me, this is yes and. The Gallup data is phenomenal. I think partnered with the PSEO data is phenomenal, and so you can really get the information that you need through all of these resources. So I'm going to highlight some of that today. So really in my outline, what I'd like to cover is talking about how PSEO fits in kind of this ecosystem of education to employment outcomes data. And then I'll talk, as Mike mentioned, the origins of the PSEO, the bit about some details about the data and what you can learn from it. And then I want to talk about the PSEO Coalition, which is a slightly different partner to the PSEO. And then I've got a slide with resources with links that I believe Katie and team will get out to you. I just provided those at the end so you can access them when you're back at the office. So starting with how PSEO fits into this whole ecosystem. of education to employment data. And this is just my mock-up. This is not any sort of official, where anyone sits in these different hexagons. But we really see ourselves as part of a bigger picture. So PSEO data are not the only data to help you with this. I'm going to talk a bit about why I think they're exceptional and why I think they're an excellent resource. At the same time, there's massive amounts of data. Gallup has beautiful data that Zach highlighted on really getting into that qualitative aspect of why people go to college, what they value from their degrees and about their employment. And I think that partnered with some of these other pieces is fantastic. There's first destination surveys. Again, your institution can get some really rich data from these types of surveys. We all know survey responses aren't fantastic, and so you're not going to get your whole organization, your whole set of alumni by any stretch of these surveys, but there's great sources of data. There's what we're kind of vaguely terming web scraped data. There's Lightcast, there's other companies that have access to some data, Equifax and these others that have access to data that they are willing to sell to folks in order to learn things. There are some really good things to learn from those as well. But what we find with PSEO data, and when I talk about what's in the data, is the value there is we really have a very, very deep dive, and we have validated data from the US Census Bureau. So it's really exceptional in that regard. But I wanted to share the fact that we believe very strongly that it fits in amongst all of these others as a way to help you learn things. It is not the only piece of data or the only source of data to help you learn things about the graduates of programs in your state. One of the things I want to highlight with PSEO data as we go forward is critical to this work is the collaboration. So there are some pieces that are in flux nationally. What data will be collected? How will those data be validated through the National Center for Education Statistics and these other places? One thing that we have realized with the PSEO and the creation of the PSEO, and Mike alluded to this in his introduction, is the importance of folks coming together and agreeing on a methodology. And that is really what happened with PSEO. And as anyone enters, and I'll share in a second who's entered already and who's sharing data, as folks enter with their data, they're agreeing on this methodology. And we're seeing more and more folks agree to the fact that this methodology is powerful. And so it's just a different way to think about things rather than an entity telling folks, this is the way you're going to use, this is the methodology you're going to use. This is another way of doing it by kind of grassroots folks deciding together that this methodology works. And that way, when we talk about benchmarking across different states or looking at national trends, we're able to agree on this together and all use that same methodology, which is pretty powerful. So the origins of the PSEO, again, Mike alluded to this, started with the University of Texas system about 8 years ago. David Troutman, who's now at the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, was at the University of Texas system. They were creating their Seek UT tool, which was a tool to help students and prospective students understand what wages they could expect based on graduating with different degrees and different programs at University of Texas institutions. And they realized they didn't have any data on students who left Texas. So any student who stayed in Texas and was working in Texas and was in the Texas Unemployment Insurance Wage Records, UI wage record system, they had great data on those folks, but they had nothing if they left Texas. So David tells the story of setting up an automated email once a month to email folks at the US Census to nudge them and say, is this possible? I know you've probably got these data. This would be really exciting. And 1 month, he actually got a reply from Andrew Foote at the US Census. And at that time, the US Census employees were allowed some professional development time, 10% of their time, to work on a project of interest to them. And so Andrew picked this as his project. And it took a couple years, really, of digging in and figuring out what data do they have, what data could the institutions in Texas at the University of Texas system send that could be matched with the data that the census already had. And it's pretty incredible to think that that 10% of Andrew's time project with just the University of Texas, then blossomed into Colorado heard about it and they wanted to join. University of Michigan heard about it, they wanted to join, and so on and so forth. And we are now, as you can see on the census's map here, we are now at more than 35 states that have at least one entity in their state that is sharing data with the PSEO coalition. I grew up playing Battleship with the actual little plastic pieces, and so I sort of think about how, just so you know, Nebraska, we've surrounded you at this point in time. Kentucky, we've surrounded you. We're getting to that tipping point of almost, we're obviously in a majority of the states, but as you can see from the color coding as well, not every state, of course, has every institution in their state that's participating. There are some that have a larger share than others. But the point being is we've got more than 1,000 institutions represented in this, and we've got some really great data to share. And I think most importantly, the folks who participate in this find value in these data. So I just wanted to highlight, because Midwest is best, I wanted to highlight what's going on in the Midwest here. And I wanted you to see the detail on who it is that has joined the PSO within each of these states. Because essentially what happens is an entity or entities in a state sign an MOU directly with census. So in the case of places like Indiana, Minnesota, Ohio, it's a state agency that shares data on behalf of a set of institutions. In some states like South Dakota, Wisconsin, Iowa, it might be a system that signs that directly with census. We also have individual institutions, like in Michigan, the University of Michigan is the only institution that has signed, and they're the only ones that share. So there's multiple ways to get in. Census, of course, really values when systems or state agencies join, partly because it's less paperwork, right? Of course, since they don't have to sign an MOU with thousands of institutions. It's also very valuable for the state to think about it that way, because then they also access those data and they can think about it as a whole. So when they're evaluating data within their states and their systems. So if you don't see your entity on there, this is just I'll call it a sales pitch, but it's free to join. So it's not really, I'm not really selling you anything except an idea. And I think the biggest sales pitch for those are your fellow commissioners who have joined and who have their data in the system. So what are the PSEO data? I'm going to show you a few screenshots in a moment of a tool that Census has created, the PSEO Explorer. But Gallup, I'll just connect this back to some things that Zach was saying as well. And I loved that Zach said he wants to dig deep and talk about the value of employment, and that it's not just the living wage. And again, yes, and we 100% believe in that as well. One of the things one of our former board members said is, it's not just earnings by any stretch. It's not just the economic value of these degrees or these certifications. At the same time, we owe it to people to tell them that they can reach that minimum threshold. If they can't reach that minimum threshold based on what they've majored in or what degree they've gotten, we owe it to them to tell them that. And I'll talk a bit about kind of the questions we can answer later, but there are multiple stakeholders for these data. It's not just an individual person deciding what they want to major in. It's also legislators, policymakers deciding, what do we do if we do notice that there are certain degrees that don't pay as well as others, but we really, really need folks to do those jobs, like preschool teachers, early child educators, some mental health providers. So these data are valuable for all kinds of folks in that way. So we've got earnings, 25th, 50th, and 75th percentile of annual earnings. The gem in here, I think personally, because you expect the earnings and they are very important, but to me, the gem in here is the flows data. So we have industry flow, what industry these folks went into after they graduated with their degree, and then also where they went geographically. Currently, it's by census region, but I'll preview some more detailed data that's to come in early 2027. And then all of these statistics, and again, I'll show you the screenshot of the tool in a moment, but all these statistics are available by institution, degree level, field of degree, graduation cohort, and they're all available 1, 5, and 10. And I'll highlight that degree level Goes all the way from less than a 1-year certificate to PhD. So everything in between and all of those degree levels are covered in these PSEO data. And this is just some background information to reassure folks, maybe who haven't joined yet or who are curious about how these data are matched, is, as I kind of alluded to, the census enters into legal agreements with state departments of higher education, systems, individual institutions, whatever that needs to look like. And then data files are shared once a year by those entities with census. They're actually, I come from an institutional research background, they're actually pretty, I can say this with all honesty, they're pretty straightforward data files. They're basically the same stuff that you're going to be sending to iPads anyways, if you send data to iPads. So they're not asking for all kinds of, complicated things or for you to calculate it in a different way than you're already calculating it. So it's really, there's an enrollment, a degree, and a demographics file are the 3 pieces. And there are other folks, because now that we've got more than 35 states and all kinds of entities in this, there's lots of folks who help each other, if you're new, walk through exactly what it is that you need to do. So they use a masked version of the Social Security number to then match these data with the data that they already have from state agencies of employment, the UI wage records. And they match those to the individual person. There's really only 2 people at Census who have access at this point, and then it's what they call picked, meaning there are no identifiable data after that point in time. So not even Andrew Foote, who I'm calling out as the person who helped create this thing, not even he can see those data at that level. And then having these longitudinal job histories, because the census has had those partnerships with the state employment agencies for this long, allows us to do that 1, 5, 10 years. And so very quickly, the jobs accessible then in here, Census maintains a national database of jobs data, as I mentioned, from the states. And that includes information about employers. That's how they get that geography. And then employee demographics, which they're also getting demographics of the graduates themselves. And then this allows them to measure earnings. And we're very careful to call them earnings, not wages, just because of the way that they're measured and because of something that's coming in 2027, which is this 3rd point here. Longer term, and we're hoping, although it may be delayed at this point, they were originally saying hopefully January 2027. May have a little delay now, given the furlough, but very exciting pilot with the IRS. This is the first project within Census that's partnering with the IRS to get access to W-2 and Schedule SE or self-employment data. And I will say the folks that I've talked to in the PSEO coalition who are most excited about this are those who are thinking about the possibilities with visual and performing arts and music majors and some of these majors that don't get paid by just one employer. So they don't have unemployment insurance records. So they don't show up as making anything really. And so they're not even in the PSEO data set. They're going to be in the PSEO data set now because they're more likely to have some of these types of earnings. And we're going to be able to dig into some of these majors that we haven't been able to before. It's very exciting. So a few screenshots. Just to give you an idea, all of the PSEO data are also available as a download. So folks can download the files. You can download just one state. You can download the whole entire file. That is a bit challenging. We have some student interns who have talked to me about big data and how big these data indeed are. And actually the coalition, which I'll get to soon, is working on ways to have some files that are more manageable for folks. But Census's goal and Census's mission is to share these data for anyone to use and assure us that these data are validated and of quality. And then it's up to us to figure out how to access them. But the tool that they've created, which is the PSEO Explorer, is fantastic. Again, this is just a screenshot. I didn't want to do it live just in case, you never know with technology, but this is an example of what you'll see with the earnings. So you see you can select all kinds of things in the drop downs. You can select the state. You could do all the partner institutions, which is what I've done. I just happen to have Colorado on here. You can also select an individual institution, an individual degree level, and then cohorts, which are designed to essentially aggregate data to such an extent that they're useful And so some majors, of course, have very few people majoring in them every year or completing those degrees every year. And so they actually do cohorts of data. So it's either 3 or 5, depending on the degree level. And then you can do the percentiles and you can look at all kinds of information down here. But this gives you an idea of the majors. And these are used for those very in the weeds. These are zip codes, 4-digit zip codes. And you can look at comparisons of, in this case, all instructional programs to engineering or anything you want to select. And you can see what those earnings trajectories are.
Gina, can you briefly explain zip codes for the audience?
Absolutely. Thanks, Mike. Yes. Yeah, zip codes, these are from the post-secondary side of things. So these are the codes that measure and, or identify, I guess is a better term, a major and where a major fits in. So each institution is going to call it something different in their place. But if you're majoring in, for instance, education, teaching, that's going to have the same zip code no matter what institution you're visiting. And that's how Census is able to then aggregate these up and match them across institutions. Even if someone calls it something different at Winona State University than they call it at Colorado State University. Thanks for that, Mike. The other two things I want to show are the flows. So got this arrow up here to highlight the fact that we were on earnings and now we can change it to flows in the Explorer tool. And this first one that I'm showing you shows flow to industry. And these are also a code. In this case, they're called NACE codes, but these are a code within the employment and the workforce that, again, every employer will have these industries that they code them to so that there's consistency across the data set as well. And so you can see, for instance, I just did a study using only the Explorer to show that it's possible. You don't actually have to download all the data if you don't want to, although it is marvelous if you do. Looking at education majors in Colorado and surrounding states, and then what industries they went into. And unsurprisingly, in that case, the vast majority of those folks go into the education services industry. But this allows us to see, and we're working on some possibilities of sort of backflow as well. What are the industries? I know Minnesota did a study of this. What they were looking at the industry of computer science and seeing what kind of things people majored in. And it wasn't always just computer science. And so following this back and forth to see what it is possible, what industries is possible for you to work in, depending on what you're majoring in. And then finally, the other flows, geography. And this is very interesting for folks. There's a lot of our members who've done some interesting studies to help their legislators, help policymakers, help others understand where are our graduates going to. And so this is, again, looking at, in this case, we just have all instructional programs and education, because that was one that I was looking at. And so I took a screenshot on that day and looking at where they go. And you can just pick one major as well, and you can look at it. It's less complicated if you pick one major at a time or one program of study at a time. Currently, it's by, as you'll see, the majority in Colorado, and then you'll see Pacific, South Atlantic, and so forth. Currently, it's by census area. But coming also in 2027, you'll be able to see, and this is going to complicate the PSEO Explorer, so they're working on what this will look like exactly, but you'll be able to look at it by state. And so I think this will be even more important for those places like Missouri, whose major cities, largest cities, are on state borders. And they'll be able to look at and be able to consider not just who stays in Missouri, but who's in Illinois, who's in Kansas, and thinking about what this looks like whole. So that's coming, and we're excited about that. So again, just kind of summarizing these forthcoming plans. PSEO data are now in the Federal Statistical Research Data Centers, or FSRDCs. Many of you have one in your state. It's either at your flagship institution or potentially in a couple other federal centers. This allows the data to be used at the individual level. It is not identifiable, but is at the individual level. And so that allows for different sorts of analyses than the publicly available data, which are aggregated. And then in PSEO 2.0, I've alluded to many of these things. We're going to have those enhanced wage records. We're going to have information on people who are self-employed and these other aspects. We're going to be able to disaggregate the data by sex and by race ethnicity. And then the state by industry flows, which I mentioned, we're not just going to have to look at regions, census regions. We're going to be able to look at specific states. So if you're interested in a group of states and thinking about that's not exactly the same as the census region, you're going to be able to dig into the data even deeper. So what can we learn from PSEO? I wanted to touch on some examples of some of our members and what they're looking at and what it's possible to answer. So these are some highlights from some of you and how your colleagues in your state agencies or systems have been using the data most recently. So I want to highlight Indiana. There's a few other states as well. But the Indiana Commission for Higher Education, they have at least an annual, it may actually be twice a year at this point in time, but they present PSEO data to high school counselors. They have an event every year, and they use that opportunity to present some of these data to help counselors, high school counselors, think about how to use these types of data in career advising to students. So that is, again, that's one stakeholder, is students directly, and also those intermediaries like career advisors or high school counselors that are talking to students about potentially heading to college and selecting what degree. Iowa Board of Regents has a set of dashboards. This is a particularly exciting one in Iowa because they rely on the PSEO data for this work. They have in statute that they must provide information on earnings to currently enrolled students in the Iowa Board of Regents institutions, and they use PSEO data to do this. So they have a set of dashboards, and then every year at the same time, they email this out to every enrolled student with the link to the dashboards to highlight for the students that these data are available, and they can click in and look at information. And our colleagues at Census always kind of joke that they can tell when this is happening because they get their Explorer website analytics, and there's always this spike once a year when folks in Iowa are looking at these dashboards. So they are being used, and we know this for sure. Iowa Department of Education, so the 2 years in Iowa, very recently, they were awarded a grant from the PSEO Coalition, and I'll talk more about the coalition in a moment, to enhance their community college program outcomes dashboard. And so they also have a dashboard that now looks at information, not just within Iowa, although that's their primary market, but outside of Iowa as well. And it was able to incorporate some benchmarking that was of interest to them. They were interested in looking at, here's Iowa's community colleges, but what's going on in Minnesota? What's going on in other places in South Dakota? And then the Ohio Department of Education, Mike talks about this. They developed a public graduate employment outcomes dashboard. Also, these are all links, by the way, so when you get access to these, we'll have these links in there because you really should go look at them. They're marvelous examples of how you can use these data specific to your state or your set of institutions. And then, as Mike mentioned, PSEO data will be used in their funding formula. Questions about that can be directed at Mike because I don't know much about that, but I'm very excited to find out more. And then I just wanted to highlight down here, institutions are using data for program review. So again, it's not just the states or the systems that are using these data, it's individual institutions. They're using these for accreditation, for program review, for really reliable source of data to know what their graduates are earning when they leave, which is oftentimes specific program accreditation is a requirement. And they've relied so long on either web scrape data or surveys of alumni that have really low response rates. And so these are really a great source of data for those types of things. Another thing with, and I think Zach mentioned this, the Gallup piece and Lumina credentials of value or ROI, measuring that. And we have a group with the coalition specifically digging into how these data can be used in that way. These are some sample questions about what PSEO data can answer. I'm not going to read them all to you. You can, again, you'll have these slides later, but we provide regularly showcases, webinars. We have a resource library, and we'll have links to all of those things in the final slide here for you to access later. Ways in which people are using these data is the biggest request that we get from our members. They want to know ideas from other places so that they can consider recreating those with themselves. And so our stakeholders, like I said, they include policymakers, institutional leaders, and staff. They do include students, but oftentimes we're thinking about intermediaries to students. We're not necessarily assuming a student is going to go to the PSEO Explorer dashboard and click through all of that overwhelming information. But the UT system worked with their career advisors to create one-pagers using PSEO data to show students with their major specifically called out at their institution, not by zip code, but by actual name of their major, they can expect for earnings, whether they're likely to stay in Texas or have to go somewhere else for a job, and all of these aspects that can be answered by the PSEO data. So very briefly, I just want to talk about the PSEO Coalition so you understand what this piece means as well, and then open it up to questions. So early on when Andrew and David and a few others were creating this whole marvelous data set, we realized really quickly David wanted to have meetings with the other folks who were joining so they could talk about how are you using the data, what are you thinking about with this? And the census it's not their mission to have a group like that. And so David asked for permission to create this sort of side entity called the Coalition, which is that any entity that joins, signs an MOU with Census, can have automatic entry into what we call the PSEO Coalition. There's no cost, there's no anything else. The only requirement is that you're engaged with these data. Your entity is providing these data, or you're related to that entity in some way. And so we meet regularly, we meet once a month. This is our vision and mission for your information. And we meet once a year in person. We meet every month on virtually on Zoom. And it really provides this unique opportunity for our partners at Census to hear directly how folks are using the data. We have a say in when they're thinking about what's coming next in PSEO 2.0. And yes, we're already talking about 3.0, even though they're not done with 2.0 yet. We get a say in that, and they value that input. And so it really is something that is directly connected to where we're heading next. And they value it, we value it. We also have been granted some resources from Gates Foundation and from Strata Education Foundation to provide some resources to enhance how folks are using these data, including research grants and webinars and showcases and all of those types of things. This one, I won't leave this up, but I just want to show this to you again. I'm sure Katie will get the slides to you, and I wanted you to have these web addresses so that you can see where to go for these things. The bottom two are specific to Census, and then the top two are specific to the PSEO Coalition. We have a rich resource library where you can see how people are using these data. You can see the dashboards that I referenced and other pieces like that. So I'm going to stop sharing so I can see folks, but I'm happy if there's a question on a slide, I can always pop it back up.
Susan.
Gina, thank you so much. Just so you know, this is terrific. We had Jason Pontius from the Iowa Board of Regents present to us twice. That's where we first heard about this work during a meeting maybe 3 years ago, Rob, when we were in Des Moines. And I think there are two things there are many things, that I think inspire me and us. But one is there a role for nonprofit colleges? And how might they participate if they'd like to? And then two, how could a compact like ours be helpful? I mean, we've shared this information, these opportunities with our members, and we put it up on our website. But is there something more that, in your view, that we could do that might be useful? Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for highlighting the independent colleges. We actually have many independent colleges that do provide their data, different ways of going about it. Kansas has a consortium of independent colleges, and they joined as a group. And so they have signed a MOU directly with Census. So that's one method for joining, kind of contingent on there being some sort of consortium like that in your state. But that is certainly not the only way. We have Iowa Board of Regents Minnesota, Indiana, I think Illinois as well. I have to look at all my details. I may be wrong on that. I might be just Indiana, uh, Minnesota, and Iowa all have agreements between their state agency. So Minnesota has SLEDS, their state longitudinal data system, and the independent colleges that would like to provide their data through there, and then they do appear in the PSEO data set. And occasionally, we do have individual independent colleges who sign MOUs directly. My sense is that that is a possibility as well. It's sort of kind of a decision tree that the best option is to have an entity it flows through, just because then your individual institution doesn't have to bother with all of the MOU and everything. You can do it as a group, but it is possible as well to do it individually. So thanks for calling that out, Susan, because we do have a lot of independent colleges that are part of the PSEO data set, which is exciting. As far as the compacts, I do have somewhat regular meetings with the 4 compacts. We all come together, me and my good friends from the four compacts, which is really fun, talking about the interests of their members, the interests of their commissioners, and where they're headed with these conversations. And I know, shout out to Aaron Horn, I have seen MHEC use these data, the PSEO data, in analyses that they share with all of you for your information. So we especially value that. We want people to be using these data. So very excited, and we always try to highlight that when we see others using the data to give people kind of spark ideas. And so I think really continuing those relationships, sharing about the data. Again, I kind of jokingly call this a sales pitch because I'm not selling anything. There's no money involved. But we're so excited about this. And I know, I love to hear that you heard about it through one of the members, right? Because I think the people most excited about it are the ones participating already. And they like to see others joining because it strengthens the data set. So the UI wage records are already from the entire United States. That's representative of the nation. But the individual institutions in the data set, we are tipping over 1,000, but the more folks we get to participate, the more we have a richer data set, and we can start making more benchmarking examples. We can start making more statements about trends we see nationally when we have more of these data in there. Thanks for the questions.
Other questions?
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's all
Well-
what I learned there. I
You're
love
such
it.
an exceptional resource for us, and I think you know, the U.S. Census Bureau is lucky to have you helping lead this coalition on behalf of all the states. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks so much, and thank you for your support. You talking about this is the best thing for us, so I really, really appreciate that.
Thanks very much.